Picture this. The internet is a dark alley, and your data is marching down there unaware like a sparkly, glittery tracksuit person. And the hackers, well, they're waiting there. They're the thugs in the alley. They're the pickpockets, con artists, and digital punks looking for an easy score. You think your firewall is tough, your karate is good, but it's basically bringing flip-flops to a knife fight. That's why cybersecurity matters. Today on Mind the Gap, we're bringing in the big guns, Tinus Green, head of consultancy at MWR CyberSec. He's part cyber bodyguard, I love that, part code whisperer, and all about shutting the door in the hacker's face. Buckle up, guys. This one's less tech talk and more spy thriller with a keyboard. Welcome.
Nice to meet you. Thank you very much.
This is actually our second time meeting, but...
yeah, we'll play it off as if it's the first time.
Nice
they
to
don't
meet
know
you.
what the timeline is, so nice to meet you again then.
It's great to have you on. I mean, if we're just going to roll straight into it, I think we were chatting a little bit briefly before this around cybersecurity and just how it impacts everybody's lives. Why is it so important?
In my opinion, I think we are in sort of a little bit of a new time where, from an organized crime perspective, cybersecurity seems to be being run as a business. These criminals, honestly, because they are getting money, because it seems to be profitable, they are really running this thing like a business. It's hard to imagine, but I promise you there are criminals out there that literally have a employee key card and they are swiping in 9 o'clock in the morning and swiping out 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're getting a pay slip for the work that they're putting in there. And I think because they can actually see that this crime is profitable, we've seen a incredible increase in the amount of cyber criminals, and they seem to be targeting all over the place. There are some of these criminals that are focusing on individuals and targeting sort of specific people. And then there are these more really state-sponsored threat actors that seem to be going after businesses as well. But between the profits that they are making and then also sort of like actually picking out a niche and really hyper-specializing into a specific thing that they seem to be good at, the industry seems to be booming there. And
Wow.
It means that a lot of us have to be defending ourselves a bit better.
Do you think it'll ever reach a bubble point and then...
Are we in a organized crime bubble is an interesting question to ask. I don't necessarily think so. I think, unfortunately, our lives are getting a lot more integrated. I don't see, apart from if stuff really, really goes bad, for technology to ever not exist. And the more technology we integrate, the more things we do. I think it's just going to keep on ticking up and up.
Jeez. Speaking about the bubble, I mean, AI is the big bubble at the moment. And, well, if they say it's reaching that point, what are the risks of working with AI today in relation to cybersecurity?
I think there's two different risks that we are seeing from a cybersecurity perspective. For the first one that we are seeing is that the barrier to entry seems to be getting a little bit lower from a criminal perspective. The one thing that we are starting to see there as well is, like, normally, and yes, with phishing attacks and everything, there's specific ways of doing things, but one of the phishing attacks is targeted phishing. So really trying to tailor your message to the actual individual that you are trying to target. And with those cases, what we are seeing with artificial intelligence is actually how easy it is to really, really craft things that are hyper-specific for a person.
Yeah.
You can give something for something like a GPT and ask it, I want to invite this person to a conference. I really need them to talk at my conference. Here is their LinkedIn profile. Here is this information that I have about them. Help me tailor like the most enticing email that will get them to want to come to my conference.
That is
and it will give that to you. It removes the language barrier because it can give that to you in almost any of the languages that you would want to do it. So it's really decreasing that barrier to entry that we have there as well. On the flip side, what we are also seeing is that a lot of organizations are implementing artificial intelligence without having a decent understanding of what it actually does. And the one thing we actually had one of our consultants do research and talks about it, is that what we shouldn't forget is that artificial intelligence is non-deterministic. Think about it. You can ask a GPT the same question twice, and the answer is going to be slightly different.
Yeah.
And as soon as something is non-deterministic, that gets very, very dangerous if you give these artificial intelligence solutions access to take actions on your behalf, because you cannot give 100% guarantee that it's always going to take the right action. And we often see that threat actors and security researchers have the ability to get these systems to do things that they should not be doing.
Sure.
And I think that's where the artificial intelligence and what they're introducing there is just, it's very interesting to see what's happening in that space.
Sticking with the AI example, because I mean, that's fairly impacted our working world quite, over the last couple of years. It's quite a recent thing. What do professionals need to keep in mind when working with AI, whether it be a paid account or free account, in terms of their security?
The number one thing that I think that people need to be aware of is the same data privacy rules that they have for all of their other solutions need to count here. The countless amounts of times that we have seen employees or organizations upload some of the most sensitive information possible to these type of solutions, and then it's not even a paid account where you have the option to say that make sure that there's no training performed on this type of data. So I think the number one rule is just to understand that it's a additional external system. If you do not feel comfortable emailing this information out, or let's put it this way, uploading that type of information to social media, maybe you need to think twice before you actually upload that information to a artificial intelligence provider as well. So I think that's where we're seeing the biggest risk, is actually a data risk of people just shipping stuff out there. And that's really going to be a problem, I think, in the future.
Self-censorship is so important when it comes to that, and what information you keep where. So I suppose in all our ecosystems in the workplace, security is important. We can't leave any gaps. I think one of the conversations that we've had before, we spoke about where are some of the common gaps in businesses. And I think we could look at that.
Sure. In terms of some of the common gaps that we see out there, I think one of the biggest things that we still see in today's time is almost a inherent trust. So we trust first, and then we'll do some verification later. And we need to be a lot better in doing that additional verification steps first. If something doesn't feel right, if something feels like it's out of place, it probably is, or it's not going to harm just to do that additional sort of check in place there as well. And when I mention that, it's across the board. If we talk about people, if someone is sending you a SMS asking you to do something, give them a call. Right? Like, nothing is going to hurt just to do that extra verification from your side, and not just trusting what data is coming in, but just doing that little bit of extra work to verify it out there as well. But then also from a technology side, I think one of the most incredible controls that we have available for us is multi-factor authentication. Just this thing of, well, it's going through one channel, but that isn't enough. Let's get a secondary channel. Let's get a prompt that says, yes, this is me, or a OTP, or something in that. Those type of controls can really make a massive, massive difference. It's been a while, but Google, for all of their employees, rolled out multi-factor authentication. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. And they were able to show that none of the phishing attacks against their employees were actually impactful, for the simple reason, even if their username and password were compromised, because there was an actual hardware token attached to that account as well. What are you going to do with it? You can't actually get access into the account still. So those, I think, are where there's still quite a bit of a gap that happens there. And I think the larger gap that we have there as well is knowledge in cybersecurity. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of fear-mongering about it. If you look at news articles, they're trying to create an article that will get you to click on it.
Absolutely.
And that often leads to giving sort of this misperception about what's actually happening in cybersecurity. I think basic education about how do these things actually work. If your bank never sends you an SMS to verify your credit card or anything like that, then that's probably an avenue that criminals are trying to take there as well. And that's the type of knowledge that we need out there, is just a little bit of awareness around, well, how do these things actually work? What do these cyber criminals actually do? And leveraging that knowledge can then help empower people to go like, that doesn't feel 100% right. I probably need to do a little bit more investigation.
She's a healthy skepticism is, I suppose, really needed, but then also educating. I know that's something that we've spoken about before as well, about how do businesses get educated on these sorts of matters. And I think everybody loves a good horror story. I don't know, with your experience, you've probably seen some instances of cyber crimes that have probably shocked you. What comes to mind?
There's a lot of horror stories out there if you talk about things like ransomware, and if you talk about those type of elements that are happening there. They don't make for the most interesting stories that we have out there.
Yeah.
I think the stories that are the best for me are the ones where there's no one single mistake that has caused this. It's more sort of an amalgamation of everything that's working together. And I think one of those stories personally for me would be a case of a incident where it's really sort of like steps that work together. We had a legacy application. So we had a system that no one actually really used anymore. It was just a proof of concept that they were running. So that's part of it, is we often struggle with legacy systems and keeping tabs on them. So we have that. Then we had this case of a employee's credentials being compromised, and how the compromise happened was actually on their personal machine. And it wasn't really anything bad that they did, apart from the fact that they logged into the same Gmail account on their work laptop versus their personal laptop. And if you do that in Chrome, it automatically synchronizes your passwords that are saved. So we have saved passwords in a browser, which isn't great, but it's not the worst thing under the sun. We have the ability that you can log into a Google account on your work laptop, which isn't the greatest thing, but it should also not lead to the biggest compromise. But now a threat actor has credentials. They were able to authenticate to this legacy application, and they were able to exfiltrate data.
Sure.
Then the last question is, where's multi-factor authentication in all of this process? And it was actually there. The organization did enforce single sign-on, which would have given multi-factor authentication, but the account that was compromised was actually a legacy local account, and multi-factor authentication wasn't enforced for local accounts. So it's this perfect storm of tiny little errors that are working together, and it leads to a very impactful thing of customer data being breached. So those are usually for me the very, very interesting cases where there's no one massive gap. It's a lot of tiny little things, and I think it goes to show that even for these larger organizations, even if they do things right, there's still a lot to learn. And even these tiny little things that we often say are not really the thing we want to focus on, you have to revisit it. You have to go and close those gaps as well.
That's incredibly fascinating, because, I mean, it's just about giving enough of a gap to get a foot in the door to get into the larger system.
Yes.
I would like to know, like, what does your team do to prevent breaches?
So predominantly what MWR does, or what the consultancy team focus on, would be offensive security. So what we have, and I think this isn't unique to us, but essentially the best way to defend is to attack, to basically understand where the gaps are, and to identify them, and then work with these organizations to close them down. I think it's very, very important, because if you don't understand how these threat actors out there are going to think, what they are going to do, it's so hard to know what the defense is,
Yeah.
and what you should be focusing on there. So predominantly what we would do is actually do that offensive work. We would do, as it's called, the hacking, ethically, of course. There's contracts and everything like that in place.
It's like stress testing, eh?
It's stress testing that needs to go into it, identify those gaps, and then work with those organizations to close it down. My side, so sort of what then I think naturally happens is, for a lot of the team, they get to the point where that gets a little bit tiring. And then one of two things happen.
Very repetitive, yeah.
Yes. They'll all either go into what we would call red teaming.
Yeah.
So that is like the pinnacle, where for everything else, you really have this narrow scope that defines down what you should be focusing on. With red teaming, it's an open contract. It's basically, well, there are rules, but basically anything goes. Like, try to get into the organization and perform a specific goal. And why red teaming exercises is important is because it removes those arbitrary boundaries that are put around the defensive control. So let's test everything together. But then on the flip side of that, some of our consultants decide to go more into incident response. So actually work on the other side with defending. And I think their training in offensive security helps quite a bit, because it allows you to think like an attacker. And that's quite important for the defense as well, because otherwise you're going to either over or underestimate a threat actor, and both of those are dangerous.
Sure. So what kind of controls can you put in place to limit the impact of a breach?
So in today's time, we no longer say that, well, if a breach happens, you almost have to take into consideration that a breach is going to happen.
Sure.
So the old school way of thinking was, you can almost think of it like a castle. So we build a moat around it and everything like that. We strengthen the perimeter around it to make sure that it stays secure. That was predominantly what everyone focused on, is let's make sure that there isn't a breach. And we've now moved more to the methodologies, which would be crown jewels or critical assets. So the focus is, rather than saying, well, how much more can we do on this perimeter to make sure that there's not a breach? If there is a breach, how can we keep the threat actors from reaching our critical assets, our crown jewels? And in those cases, there's a wide variety of different controls that are applied to that. There is identity and access management. So the question, should everyone have access to these critical assets? And should everyone have the same level of access to those critical assets there as well? And restricting that down through things like the principle of least privilege. You only need access to the elements that you really need access to. So doing an investigation around those type of things there as well. And then I think there are conventional type of controls that need to be in there. Once you've done security assessments, you've identified some of those gaps, harden them, and make sure that you are updating your systems. Updates are almost rarely for new features. They're always for, there's a security bug and we need to fix it. So making sure that you keep those updates up and running. And those are the type of controls that you can try to implement there to limit the impact of the breach, rather than saying, well, a breach will never happen, because it tends to happen, and then you need to be ready for it.
And on some level, I mean, there's obviously different levels, as you just said, to how they can be impactful. And I think one of the things that I want to hop back to, because you mentioned it earlier, is, and I think it's quite a common thing in the workplace now, is our device ecosystem. Most of us are using multiple devices, whether it be from a hybrid point of view, where we have an office laptop and then something at home that we log into, or our phones that we send emails off and everything like that. They're all linked. And so you said the biggest security step that we could probably have is multi-factor authentication on those devices. Is there anything else that businesses can look at from that perspective?
So there's the saying of like, bring your own device. So BYOB, right? Or D for device. We call it bring your own disaster. Just because as soon as you have people bring their own devices, it tends to get a little bit rough. But organizations are going to do it. In today's time, at least, whatever you are using in your organization, actually allows you to configure it a little bit better. So for example, one of the controls that we have in today's time is called device posturing. So rather than just allowing any device to get access to any resources, you can actually enable device posturing, which means that when someone tries to connect from a device, it's going to run a couple of checks for us first.
Okay.
And depending on what happens with those checks, it's going to behave differently. So let's say, for example, you are traveling on a work trip, then probably it's good that it's going to ask you for a additional multi-factor authentication prompt versus you're connecting from South Africa where we are. So that's a little bit more expected that we have in those cases. Maybe it's a new device, so we need to do a little bit of checks and everything like that there as well. So I think those are the type of things that is important to try and implement from that perspective. And we are getting the tools to do that.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And I mean, everything from a consumer point of view, so outside of the workplace, is designed to be a ecosystem. We're encouraged to buy more products from a company and be able to assign everything on there. I mean, look at the Apple ecosystem, look at the Android ecosystem. Now, to talk about business security is one thing, but personal security, what can people do to be mindful of that in their own homes?
So again, multi-factor authentication. Most of your things are actually in today's time will allow you to configure that. There is the running jokes and everything on the internet that says like, as soon as Google sees a new device signing on, there's like these alarm bells that go off. But I think it's important. I think it's actually important to pay attention to those things of like, is this actually you, and to understand where it's coming from. For personal security itself, I think the most important two things that you can do there is the first thing is understand that your mobile phone is actually just another laptop that you have. If you think about the incredible power behind it and all of the different applications that you have on it, you need to see it as an additional laptop, as an additional powerful system that you have. And for that reason, you need to enforce the same security for it. If you have a lock screen, maybe don't. Rather use biometric authentication or an actual password that you type in. And the reason that is so important is because how these mobile devices work is almost their entire security ecosystem is based off that initial thing that you use to unlock it.
Yeah.
So if you just have the little L pattern or the 4 zeros for your initial thing, it means that the entire security for everything else is dependent on that code. So make sure that you actually have something securely there. And again, if the device is asking you for an update, it's not always for new features. Most times it's because there's an actual security bug and you want to stay secure. So make sure that you actually take the time to have it install those updates rather than ignoring it for a month or two extra. And then the rest of personal security, I think, is really just around that element of self-awareness again. Making sure that when you get information, when something comes to you, don't just believe it from the start, but actually do a little bit of verification from your side there as well. If a bank is sending you an SMS, or even if someone from the bank is making as if they're calling you, there's nothing wrong with giving them a call back, right? On your card, you'll have the number for the bank, or on your app. Those type of things are important for you to do that extra steps of verification to keep yourself safe.
Biggest thing is the mindset shift, I would say.
Yes.
And including being proactive and taking on all those steps and precautions, but also just, like you said, I wouldn't even have thought about the security thing from an updates point of view. Like, my phone's going to update. I'm like, sheesh, I don't want to clear up, 5 gigs of storage to download, 1.1.2 of whatever iteration I'm using. Let's skip a few versions and then I'll update it again or whatever. But to think about how small a gap any kind of attack needs, I'm sure, like you said, it's not the big scary things, it's not the horror stories that you hear. We're vulnerable in in so many ways, and in some senses, all our systems are compromised to an extent. How we react and how we respond, and how proactive we are in looking at how do we upgrade it is key. From this conversation, at least, is what I'm understanding.
Definitely. And I think the idea behind it is we're already practicing that in the rest of our lives, especially here in South Africa.
Totally.
I mean, you choose where you're driving with the windows of your car open and not, right? You're choosing when it's important to lock your door, those type of things. And I think all we need to do is the same type of vigilance from a cybersecurity perspective, is know when it's time to do certain things or why they are important as well.
Is there any topic that I think you have found interesting, or something that's come to mind recently that you're like, oh, so that's a new development that you'd probably want to talk about?
For me personally, a lot of what I've been working on with this year has specifically been around data.
Yeah.
And how, and this I think is a problem from a individual perspective, small organizations and even large organizations, is how important it is to get a handle on your data and where things are. The best thing to ask individuals to get an idea for how good they're managing that is, what does your downloads folder look like?
Chaos.
Yeah,
That's a natural question.
It's basically the thing, right? Is like, if your downloads folder is that hectic, then probably chances are that like the rest of everything around your life, where your data sits, where it's being used, all of that, you probably need to get a little bit more of a handle on it.
Yeah.
And the reason that's quite important for us is, in the past, and what we are still seeing from threat actors, is that for a large portion, it's ransomware, right? The best way to be able to extort money is from the perspective of denying availability for systems. So let's ransomware the entire organization. No one can access anything, so they will pay us to get access back to that. But we're seeing a little bit of a shift. We're seeing a shift going towards data and the ability to exfiltrate large amounts of it and then sell that for use further on. And it's very interesting from the assessments that we have done in the past. There's actually quite a lot of steps that we need to do to be able to get what you would call administrator access that then allows us to be in a position to deploy ransomware. But what we have found is even just having that foot in the door is oftentimes enough to have so much information that you don't even need to worry about administrative access. You can just, with that one foot in the door, start to pull information that will be valuable, that will be able to extort a business or an individual. And that's quite a dangerous thing.
Totally.
So data itself and where we keep it, how we keep it, who we give access to it, I think is a big problem. And I think we're starting to see that threat actors are catching on to that as well. And that concerns me a bit, because what I'm seeing is that the barrier to entry to data extortion seems to be significantly lower than what it is for the barrier to entry for even ransomware.
Sure, that is insane. It's quite crazy to think about how technology is geared to make us more open, make us more connected. But with that, the risks come, and the inclination then to become a little bit more conservative with our data, with our accounts, with everything like that. It's quite a shift from the trend that the technology wants us to try and do. Is there a world ahead of us that you see where security is tighter? Do you think this will become something that becomes a gradually improving system? Or do you think this is always going to be the same fight with the same kind of creative minds on both ends of the spectrum, and those fighting crime, those participating in it?
I don't see it ending anytime soon. And I think it's because
It'll never go away. It's always
because security comes at a price.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not one to advocate that we need absolute security, because absolute security would mean turning all devices off. Right. If an organization tells me that they have like a 0% risk appetite, I'm like, okay, so you don't do business, right? Like, let's just get that right. As soon as you turn on the device, there's a element of risk. So I don't see it going away, because ultimate security means we can't use anything. So for me, I think it's always going to be a little bit of an ebb and a flow that's going to happen between more security, less security, and what we focus on. I don't think everything is the same level of risk, or anything is at the same level, but it's figuring out where your personal risk appetite lies. For someone like me, for example, I stay away from social media, just for the simple reason that it's hard for me to maintain it to the level where I would be satisfied with what's out there, and that it is creating what I wanted to do. So for me, it's LinkedIn, because that's professional, that keeps your stuff. But things like Facebook and those type of things, it's too hard for me to maintain it to a level where I'm comfortable with it. And I think that's the same thing with your physical security as well, right? If you're looking to buy a home or to move into a new space, you're keeping that in mind as well, right? Like, this risk factor or that risk factor, does it work for me? Does it not work for me? And just be mindful and cognizant that you're actually spending the time to figuring out what works for you to the level where you feel comfortable.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask you quite a fun and probably juvenile question to end off. What is probably the most creative crime you've seen come over the years? I mean, it could even be a past one, but with the trend and changes in technology, I'm sure you've probably seen something quite interesting.
Creative. That's a difficult word to. I'm trying to rack my brain around.
I think the nature of it is always quite creative.
Yes, I think that's the thing behind it, is there has to be a lot of creativity that's applied to it. I'm trying to rack my brain behind some of my personal cases and other ones that I have there as well.
If only they could use that creativity to do something proactive and contributing to society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're finding bugs and everything with it there as well. What would be a creative one?
Because that's certainly the counter to solving risks within a business is, you know, like you said, doing the stress testing on a security system. That is in itself also very creative.
The one that, but it's more on sort of like the technical side for me behind it, is it's actually a vulnerability. So it's now a known one and everything, and organizations are fixing that as well. But the one that I really, really enjoy, just from the creativity perspective for me, is one called dependency confusion. So basically what it boils down to is that we live in this interconnected world.
Right.
And as part of that interconnected world, when you write software, a lot of times you're not actually developing things from scratch.
Yeah.
So you would use libraries, you would use packages and everything like that. You would be using that to develop your software. And what dependency confusion boils down to is that at the point where the system that is now going to install and build your application, at the point where it needs to decide which is the correct package that it needs to install, the correct library that it needs to install, there's this very interesting way in which you can introduce confusion into that process. So what the researcher that found was that a lot of the times these systems that need to decide where these libraries are, they can't really distinguish between different locations of where these libraries are. So what they use is they use version numbers.
Sure.
So they would use a version number. So this would be package 2.1.3 that we need to install. And that's the highest version number. So that's probably the right one. And what the researcher found is that there's this way to create confusion if there's an internal library to externally host a library that has a higher version number. So you could go for version number 9000 of your malicious package, and these systems are actually very, very simple. And we'll go like, yes, of course, version 9000 is higher than version 0.1.1.1. So I'm going to take this one, and it's actually an incredible vulnerability to introduce malicious code. And why it's so creative for me is when the security researcher found this and did a proof of concept for it, in one fell swoop, this person was able to compromise PayPal, Apple, Microsoft, and Tesla at the same time because they were all vulnerable to the same dependency confusion.
And it's hiding right under your nose as well. It's the last place you would, not to say think to look, but
it's not part of your stuff, right? Like you're just using this package and like it should be okay, right? Because it's there. So for me, that was personally one that is highly creative in the way that it works.
That's ingenious. Wow, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this chat today. It's been absolutely fascinating unpacking this topic, because I think it's more than the, shall I say, everyday, just let's not think about it. Let's just pretend that it's not a problem. Let's sweep it under the carpet kind of issue. It's so pressing, and it's constantly changing, and it's constantly something that we've got to be not just aware of, but like we said, proactively looking at our mindsets and adjusting to, and looking at within our personal lives, within our corporate systems, and just in the way that we approach business and technology.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed that conversation, we have another follow-on that we did with Tinus earlier in the year that I think would be a fantastic way for you to look at more topics within cybersecurity, but also something that complements the chat that we've just had now. So remember to like and subscribe, follow what we're doing, and leave a comment.